Hey guys, so what's happening? This is the second video this week, and of course, that's not something that normally happens on this channel. But today's Wednesday, so we're going to do a Workflow Wednesday episode on a topic that I have a hard time explaining to someone who isn't a RED owner or someone who has not been shooting on RED for a number of years. Even people who have rented REDs before. You know, and I have some friends like that, where when I bring my RED onto a project, they're like, oh yeah, I've worked with RED before. And they don't really understand sort of how exposure works, because it doesn't work exactly the same way as it does with other camera systems. They also don't understand how ISO works, which again is something that is different than other camera systems. And then maybe the biggest difference, and I've said this in other videos before, for no reason other than because we should all take the time to learn as much as we can with every single camera system that we're using to get the most out of it. And what I'm alluding to is that not all RAW is equal. It's not all the same. And that's what I'm going to try to show in the video today. So I'm standing in front of my iMac Pro, because I'm going to be sharing with you what it is that I'm talking about here and how it is that this works. So essentially, when you go to expose on your RED, you get to make one of two decisions. Is this scene a high key scene, or is this scene a low key scene? And that is your first exposure decision that you have to make in order to determine or to make sure that you expose properly for your scene, right? And then also when you bring it into post, so that your clips behave the way that you expect them to in your editing software. So let's jump into Resolve. So we're going to jump in here to Resolve, and I have already uploaded a couple of clips, and I created a timeline. So I'll show you here. It's already created. I'm going to jump right over to the color tab. And in the color tab, I'm going to move my scopes, and I'm actually going to make this scope larger so that we can all see it. I'm going to lighten up the gradical, and then I'm going to darken up the waveform so that it's easier to see on YouTube. And I'm going to let it show me the RGB. But if you wanted to do just Luma, you just unclick the colorize. So I'm going to let that show. Now, here is my first clip that I have loaded into the timeline, right? This is in full daylight, so it's full sun. And I'm taking this picture of a white flower. And of course, the sky is in the background and it's all blurry because I'm focusing straight up on the flower. So in my raw controls, we can see here that I changed this from project, which this is the way it loaded, to the actual clip, because I want to see what it is that I actually captured or how I exposed in camera, because this is what I'm using. I'm using the IPP2 pipeline, recording right into the camera. So I'm using the clip information. My color science is IPP2. I'm using the color space red, white gamut RGB. And I'm using the gamma curve log 3G10, which, by the way, it does not default to log 3G10 when you load it into Resolve or when you load it into Final Cut or even Premiere. So if you're working in the IPP2 pipeline, I would recommend that you select your gamma curve to be log 3G10, because it then actually shows you the same thing that you saw in camera. All right, so I shot this at ISO 800, and as we can see, it looks very clear from my scope here that I am not clipping any highlights and I am not clipping any shadows. So what I meant by decide if in fact you want a high key or a low key type of exposure or final image, I am clearly going for a high key image because I am shooting in full sunlight, and I don't have any way of actually manipulating the sky or any of the parts where the sun is just blasting, where the trees are not casting shadows. So I'm going with a high key look. So again, I'm using the base ISO of 800 because I exposed, and when I exposed, essentially, I made sure that I didn't clip any of the colors. So in other words, my traffic lights, none of them were on. And also my histogram was healthy and not either exposing to the left or exposing to the right. I was well balanced within my two goalposts to make sure that I got all of the color information out of my scene. And this is the result that I got. So here it is. Now, when you take the time to expose properly on red and you're shooting in RAW, this is where R3D or REDCODE RAW makes a huge difference, more difference than anything I've seen from Blackmagic or anything that I've seen from Canon and even ARRI Log C. I can now take this image, and if I go into my ISO settings, it doesn't matter what ISO I choose. So let's say I want to go to ISO 1280. My image gets brighter, but my highlights will not clip. And I can keep pushing this. So I'll show you. I'm going to go to 1600, still creeping up, but I'm not clipping any highlights. That's a big deal, right? I'm going to go to 2500. Again, it got brighter, but my highlights are nice and healthy with plenty of headroom. So let's move on and go to ISO 3200. So this is now ISO 3200, and you'll notice I haven't lost any detail at all in my point of interest, which is this flower. I can see all the little creases and whatever the little vein looking things that make up the flower. So it's kind of impressive, right? And again, I shot this at ISO 800. So if I push this to, let's say, ISO 6400, again, my image just got a whole lot brighter, but I am not clipping my highlights. My highlights are still there. Now, if I go the full extreme and do 12,800, again, I am not clipping the highlights, and I can still see detail in the flower in the scene. I'm going to tell you that this example, right, where the exposure happened, I'm now bringing it into post, and I am pushing the ISO to really stupid, ridiculous levels, and my highlights are protected, is not something that you can see on the Canon C200, and it is not something that you will see on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K or Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. I don't know about the Ursa Minis because I haven't physically shot with those cameras, but the two pocket cameras, the 4K and 6K, cannot do what I just showed you. Now, who on earth would and why would anyone do this, right? And of course, this is still log. But let me just back up for a second. And I'm going to go back to ISO 800, which is the way that I shot it. Now, I'm going to apply the red provided LUT for this clip. So I'm going to go right-click here on my node. I'm going to go to LUTs, 3D LUT, red IPP2. I'm going to select Rec 709. And I'm going to go medium contrast, very soft on my highlight roll-off, because that happens to be my favorite. So very quickly you see here that based on the way that I shot this scene, my histogram looks like it's fine, except I probably could bring down some of the lift or the shadows to give it more contrast, right? But no detail is lost in the flower petal at 800. This is a good starting point for this image. Of course, if I go back to the raw settings and I go down to like ISO 400, that contrast that I was talking about, if I wanted to bring down the shadows to give it more contrast, begin to sort of help out. And I can bring it down to even ISO 200, and then you can see how the image actually continues to get better. That's good, right? But I'm not clipping any of my shadows. I'm not clipping any of that dark information. And that's because I exposed correctly in camera when I was out taking this frame. So I can go down to ISO 50, and you can see here from the histogram that I am still, no matter what, not even, this is the lowest point, which is this part here in the flower, these shadow areas. Even the lowest point, it is not clipping the dark information. And of course, we can see a whole lot of detail out of the actual flower, along with the sky, the clouds, and that background that is all blurry on purpose. I've had people say before, why is the background all blurry? Did you miss focus? I'm not sure if that was a joke and why I said that. Moving on. So going back in the other direction. So again, I shot this at ISO 800. So this would be a good starting point for me to begin manipulating this image into whatever it is that I wanted to do. If for some reason I need the entire image to become brighter, I can still do the same thing that I showed you before, right? I'm going to jump straight up into ISO 1280. And you can see my histogram or my scopes are still showing my waveform. I keep calling it histogram. I don't even know why. So my waveform continues to show that I am not clipping any highlight information. So now I've just pushed it up to 1280. I'm going to push it up to 3200. So clearly this image looks like it has some major problems. My highlights are not clipping. Nothing is shelving, right? Which really means that I have all of that information still available to me. But maybe that's not pushing it enough. So let's see. Let's go with ISO 6400. So this would be an image that you will not be able to recover had I done this to the Canon C200 clip, okay? But because all of that information is still there, even if I don't mess with the raw controls, I can go back here and I can bring down my highlights, because again, all the information is still there. And I can bring down my shadows or lift, adjust my midtones, that looks pretty good, and there's no noise in my image. That's clearly an extreme correction, but again, if you try it with your own raw footage, and again, it doesn't matter if it's the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, the Pocket 6K, or the Canon C200, or even the RAW that Atomos is able to capture out of the Canon C300 Mark II, you can't do this. Is it for everyone? Does everyone absolutely need this? The answer is no, it isn't. And no, not everyone needs it. But having this level of security, having this level of control is in part what makes a camera system like the RED much more expensive than other camera systems. So when we see on YouTube different people talking about how it is or why is a RED so expensive when I can shoot this on my Sony, or I can shoot this on a Canon, or I can shoot it on a Blackmagic camera, the answer is workflow. It's that entire ecosystem that makes something like this possible, and why it is that a lot of production houses, and more specifically some of the episodic series that we see on Netflix choose to shoot with these cameras because they need to be able to move quickly. They need to capture all the information, and should something get messed up, they need to be able to correct it and fix it in post in a way that is not going to cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Hopefully you guys found this information useful. If you did, be sure to let me know. If you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing so that we can go over more of these types of topics with a lot of other camera systems. Until next time, I'm Carlos, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care.